Hello, in this lecture, we're going to finish up ER model. So let's talk about roles. So entity sets of a relationship does not need to be distinct. So we have employee entity set here, and we have a relationship works for. And you'll notice that there are these labels. One's called manager, the other one's called worker. So these are called roles. So these kind of specify how employee entities interact via works for relationship. So these are totally optional. Sometimes in order for you to represent some data or information, you're gonna have to use roles, but it is optional. Okay, so you'll notice that there is an arrow going into employee, but nothing on the worker side. So I don't know if you remember, but this means one, right? So there is one manager, okay, one manager and multiple workers who are managed by this manager. And there are many employee workers who works for a single manager. These are the three different types of attributes. So we have just the regular attribute, but then we also have composite, multi-valued, and derived. And so these are not really recommended. So try to avoid them if you can, but sometimes it's not really, it's unavoidable. So let's take a look at the first one. So composite attribute. Okay, these are a combination of other attributes, and it's called composite. Um, in a student entity, a lot of times you have person's address, right? So address is a classic example of a composite attribute because it has different parts to the address. So it has the street number, street name, possibly an apartment number or a unit number. It also has the name of the city, state, zip code, and even a country. So this address attribute has multiple parts, and that's an example of a composite attribute. The next one is called multi-value attributes. Okay, so this means that it can hold not just a single value, but multiple values. So for example, if a person, let's say there's an attribute called degree. So a lot of people have bachelor's degree. Some people have a master as well. Some people all have all three, PhD, master, and bachelor's, right? So this degree attribute holds multiple values. It could hold multiple values, so that's why it's called multi-value attributes. Okay, derived attribute, I don't know if you remember, but this was in the example we went over last week. So this is where this value of this attribute could be derived or calculated using other attributes. Okay, so if you know a person's date of birth, you should be able to derive their age, right? So that's an example. If you have an attribute called remaining balance, using the total loan value, how many months left, and maybe even the interest rate, you should be able to compute that or derive that, right? So that's an example of a derived attribute, and these are usually represented using a dashed oval. Okay, so here is what I just talked about. So we have a customer entity set. Okay, the customer ID here is unique, so that's going to be our primary key. Okay, and then we have date of birth and then age. So if you know the person's date of birth, you should be able to compute it or derive it, right? So this is a derived attribute, and that's why it's in a dashed or dotted oval. Okay, and here we have a phone number, and you'll notice that this phone number attribute is in a double oval, not a single. So this means that this is a multi-value attribute because a person could have more than one phone number. They could have their home phone number, their work phone number, maybe even a cell phone. So this one is called multi-valued, and it's going to be a double oval. Okay, and then like I talked about, address is a classic example of a composite attribute where it has multiple parts. So address has street, city, state, and zip code. And again, street is divided into another level, street number, street name, and apartment number. Okay, so this is another example of a composite attribute. Here's another one, name. So a person's name, we have our first name, middle initial, and last name. It has multiple parts. So this is another example of a composite attribute. And again, you want to try to avoid these types of attributes. So let's summarize what we have gone over this whole the past couple of weeks. So our big idea, main idea is entity set. Okay, it's going to be a rectangle, and then connected to an entity set, we usually have a set of attributes. Okay, so that's going to be an oval, and then connecting two or more entity set is going to be our relationship set, and that's going to be in a diamond shape. Okay. Weak entity set means, actually, let's go over this first. So each entity set should have a primary key, and that's indicated using a just underline. That means that no two values in the entity set will have the same value for this attribute. Okay, it's going to be unique. Okay, so if an entity set does not have a primary key, it doesn't have an attribute that is strong enough, there's nothing unique, then it's going to be a double rectangle, indicating that it's going to be a weak entity set. If a relationship is connected to a weak entity set, you also use a double diamond to indicate that. Okay, we talked about a multi-value attribute, which you can hold multiple values, like someone's degree, someone's phone number. Derive attribute is an attribute where we can derive this value using another attribute. Okay, total participation, this one is where this entity set needs to have at least, it has to be connected to at least another entity set on the other end of the relationship. Okay, so that's going to be a double line here. If it's a single line, it means partial participation, meaning it doesn't have to be connected to an entity set here. So an example was a professor and a student, right? So a professor does not have to advise a student, but a student does need to be advised by someone. Okay, and then discriminating attribute of a weak entity set. So for example, let's say we have a player entity set. Okay, and then so their jersey number alone is not really unique because another player from a different team could, they could share the same jersey number, right? So that itself is not really strong enough. So that's indicated using a dotted line for the attributes. Okay, these are some symbols that we use for cardinality information. So if it's 1 to 1, it's pretty easy. Just arrows going on both ends. Okay, many to many is just single line, no arrows. Okay, many to one. So this can be a little bit confusing because you're not really sure which way the arrow goes into. Okay, so this is going to be the many side, and then if it's one, that's where you're going to have the arrow on that side. You can also specify exactly what the limit is, what's the minimum, what's the maximum. So 1 dot dot h, this will be a certain number, means that there could be anywhere from 1 to 3. Okay, if it's exactly 3, the example we used was there are exactly 3 referees. We can do 3 dot dot 3. So 3 is min and the max, so there could be exactly only 3. Okay, you could also have 0 dot dot 1, meaning it's optional. We talked about roles today, right? Okay, so that's going to be just a label on this side. Okay, so now make sure you watch all the videos on Canvas. Okay, and textbook reading is still, we're on chapter 6. Okay, and homework 1 should be due soon. So after you have done your homework, make sure you take a picture with your phone or you scan it if you have a scanner. And it's best if you can submit it into a PDF form rather than a JPEG. It's just easier to open. Okay, and quiz 1 should be available to take this Friday noon, and then you have Sunday midnight to work on it. Okay, so let's take a look at this practice problem. So suppose you're given the following requirements for a simple database for National Hockey League. So NHL has many teams. Each team has a name, a city, a coach, a captain, and a set of players. Each player belongs to only one team. Each player has a name, a position, their skill level, and a set of injury records. A team captain is also a player. A game is played between two teams, okay, referred to as host team and guest team, and it has a date and the score. Okay, so create an ER diagram. Okay, using your textbook. You can refer to your textbook, and if you have any assumptions, make sure you indicate those. Even on the exam, if you are not sure what it's asking for, you can also write down what you think it means. Okay. And I think it's easier if you could use draw.io. There's a video on Canvas that you can watch on how to use that. Okay, so I'll give you guys about 10 minutes. Okay, let's go over it. So yours may not look the same as this one, and that's fine. There are multiple right answers. So we have team being an entity set, player, and injury record. So a lot of you might have had injury record as an attribute. And then we have game being a relationship. We have captain belongs to. Okay, and then log. Okay, so a player can be the captain of a team, and a team has exactly one captain, so that's why we have one here. So the arrow means one, right? 1 to 1. A player belongs to one team, but a team has many players. So that's why we have one arrow going into here. A player belongs to one team. A team has many players. And then here we have the injury record. Okay, and each injury record has to do with exactly one player because even if there were two players that were involved in the same accident or injury, they are gonna have different injuries, right? So that's why we have the arrow going into player. Okay, because each injury record has to do with one player, but a player can have many different injuries. And we have ID, the injury ID, and description of the injury. Okay, and then we have games here. So a team plays many games. So there's no arrow going in here, but a game has exactly one host team and one guest team. Okay, and it has date and the score. Okay, and then we have team name. Team name is unique, city and coach. And here for player, we have skill level, player's name, which is not unique because more than one person could have the same name, their position, and player ID. So this is going to be our primary key. Player ID is unique. So if player had jersey number attribute instead of the player ID, how would you change this? What would change in this diagram? So the player would not really have a primary key because jersey number alone is not enough to be a primary key, right? So it will be a weak entity set. The jersey number, it would be a dotted line, and then player would have a double rectangle.